I never thought I'd be the type of person to buy someone's workplace just to teach them a lesson, but here we are. And honestly, watching my son-in-law clean those bathroom tiles with the same hands that used to sign executive memos might be the most satisfying thing I've ever witnessed. But let me back up, because this story starts way before that beautiful moment of justice. It starts 3 years ago, when my daughter Emma brought home this guy named Derek, who looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. I should mention that I've always been what you might call financially comfortable, not flashy about it, mind you. I drive a modest Honda, live in a nice but not ostentatious house, and I've always believed that money is a tool, not a personality trait. My late husband left me well provided for, and over the years, I've made some smart investments that have grown substantially, but I never felt the need to announce my financial status to the world. Derek, however, had his own ideas about who I was and what I represented in his perfect little life with my daughter. The first red flag came at their engagement dinner. I'd offered to host it at my place. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends. Derek arrived late, immediately complained about the wine selection, and spent most of the evening on his phone taking work calls. When Emma tried to include me in conversations about their future plans, Derek would literally turn his back to me and redirect the conversation toward people he deemed more important. "Mrs. Henderson," he said at one point, not even looking at me while cutting his steak, "Emma tells me you're between jobs right now. That must be tough at your age. Finding employment after 50 is really challenging in today's economy." I wasn't between jobs. I was retired by choice, living comfortably off my investments, but I didn't correct him. Something about his tone, the way he said it like he was doing me a favor by acknowledging my existence, made me want to see where this attitude would lead. "Oh, Derek's just concerned about family," Emma said quickly, shooting him a look. "He likes to make sure everyone's taken care of. Taken care of." Like I was some charity case he'd graciously decided to tolerate. The wedding planning was worse. Derek had opinions about everything, and those opinions usually involved minimizing my role or input. When I offered to contribute financially to the wedding, Derek actually laughed. "That's sweet, Mrs. Henderson, but Emma and I have this covered. We wouldn't want you stretching your budget for our special day." Emma looked mortified, but she didn't say anything. That was becoming a pattern. Derek would make these little digs, these subtle put-downs disguised as concern, and Emma would just get quiet and try to change the subject. I started paying closer attention to how he treated other people. Waiters, store clerks, anyone he perceived as beneath his station got the same dismissive treatment. But he was charming to people he wanted to impress, especially anyone connected to his job at Morrison & Associates, this mid-level consulting firm where he'd recently been promoted to regional manager. The promotion had gone to his head in a big way. Suddenly he was talking about executive decision-making and strategic oversight, like he was running Fortune 500 companies instead of managing a team of 12 consultants in suburban Ohio. But the real problem wasn't his arrogance, it was watching what it was doing to my daughter. Emma had always been confident, independent, full of opinions and dreams. She'd graduated summa cum laude, traveled through Europe on her own, started her own small graphic design business. But around Derek, she became smaller somehow, quieter, always checking his face before she spoke, gauging his mood, walking on eggshells. I watched this transformation happening gradually over months, and it broke my heart. But every time I tried to talk to Emma about it, she'd defend him. "He's just stressed about work, Mom. The promotion comes with a lot of pressure. He doesn't mean anything by it. He's actually really thoughtful when you get to know him. You just don't understand his sense of humor." His sense of humor, right, like the time he joked at a family barbecue that Emma had married up and should be grateful he'd chosen her despite her small-town background. Or when he told his work friends, right in front of me, that he'd inherited a mother-in-law who was still figuring out life at 60. I was 58 and I'd been figuring out life just fine. "Thank you very much." The breaking point came 6 months after their wedding. Emma had invited me over for Sunday dinner, something we'd done regularly before Derek entered the picture. But lately, these dinners had become rare, and when they did happen, Derek spent most of the time making it clear I was an unwelcome intrusion. This particular Sunday, I'd brought a homemade apple pie, Emma's favorite, and a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Nothing extravagant, just a nice gesture from a mother who missed spending time with her daughter. Derek was in the middle of telling some long, boring story about a client meeting when I made the mistake of asking Emma about her graphic design work. She'd been so passionate about it before the wedding, but lately she barely mentioned it. "Oh, I've been scaling back on the business stuff," Emma said, glancing nervously at Derek. "Derek thinks it might be better for me to focus on supporting his career right now. Maybe look into some volunteer work instead." Volunteer work? I couldn't hide my surprise. "Emma, you built that business from nothing. You had regular clients, you were making good money." "It's not about the money, Mom," Derek interjected, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd come to hate. "It's about priorities. Emma understands that my career trajectory requires a supportive home environment." Her little design hobby was creating unnecessary stress? Her little design hobby. 3 years of building a client base, creating beautiful work, earning recognition in local business circles, and he called it a hobby. "I think what Derek means," Emma said quickly, "is that we're thinking about starting a family soon, and it makes sense for me to have more flexibility." But I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't her choice. This was Derek systematically dismantling the things that made Emma who she was, and she was letting it happen. "Well," I said carefully, "I think it's important for everyone to have something that's their own, something they're passionate about." Derek set down his fork and looked at me with that expression I'd seen 100 times before, the look that said I was a naive old woman who didn't understand how the real world worked. "Mrs. Henderson, I appreciate your concern, but Emma and I make decisions together. As a team, I know that might be hard to understand for someone who's been on their own for a while, but marriage is about compromise and shared goals." Someone who's been on their own for a while. Like being widowed was some kind of personal failure that disqualified me from having opinions about relationships. I felt my face flush. But I kept my voice level. "Of course. I just want Emma to be happy." "Emma is happy," Derek said firmly. "Aren't you, honey?" Emma nodded, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. The conversation moved on to other topics, but the damage was done. I could feel Derek's satisfaction radiating across the table. He'd put me in my place again. Reminded me that I was an outsider in my own daughter's life. After dinner, while Derek was in his home office taking yet another important call, Emma walked me to my car. "Mom, I'm sorry if Derek seemed a little short tonight. He's been working really hard on this new project, and his boss has been putting a lot of pressure on him." I wanted to grab her shoulders and shake her. I wanted to ask her when she'd started making excuses for someone treating her mother like garbage. But I could see how fragile she was. How desperately she needed to believe that her marriage was solid and her choices were right. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said instead. "I just miss talking to you." "Really talking?" "I know, Mom. Things will settle down once Derek gets through this busy period at work. Maybe we can do lunch next week. Just the two of us." But I knew there wouldn't be a lunch next week. Derek would find some reason why it wasn't convenient, some work obligation or social commitment that required Emma's attention. He was systematically isolating her from everyone who'd known and loved her before he came along. I drove home that night feeling angrier than I'd felt in years. Not just at Derek, but at myself for letting this go on so long. For biting my tongue and trying to keep the peace while watching my confident, capable daughter turn into a shadow of herself. That's when I started paying closer attention to Derek's work situation. Morrison and Associates, his precious consulting firm where he was such an important regional manager. I'd heard him mention the company name countless times, always with this reverent tone like he was discussing sacred ground. I decided to do a little research. Morrison and Associates turned out to be smaller than Derek's boasting suggested. About 40 employees total, with regional offices in 3 states. They specialized in business efficiency consulting for mid-sized companies, helping streamline operations and reduce costs. Nothing groundbreaking, but solid. Steady work. The company had been founded 15 years ago by Richard Morrison, who was now in his early 70s and, according to the industry articles I found, looking to retire within the next few years. Morrison had built the company from scratch and was reportedly very selective about potential buyers, wanting to ensure the company culture and employee relationships he'd spent years cultivating would be preserved. I found Derek's LinkedIn profile and read through his employment history. He'd been with Morrison and Associates for 3 years, starting as a junior consultant and working his way up to regional manager. His profile was full of buzzwords about leveraging synergies and optimizing operational frameworks, but the actual accomplishments were pretty standard stuff. What interested me more was the company's financial situation. As a private company, they weren't required to publish detailed financial reports, but there were industry publications that tracked consulting firms. And I had access to business databases through my investment portfolio management. Morrison and Associates was profitable but not thriving. They'd lost 2 major clients in the past year, and their revenue had been essentially flat for the past 3 years. Richard Morrison was getting older and less involved in day-to-day operations, and there wasn't an obvious succession plan in place. In other words, it was exactly the kind of company that might be open to acquisition by the right buyer. I spent the next few weeks learning everything I could about the consulting industry, business acquisitions, and specifically about Morrison and Associates. I reviewed their client list, studied their competition, and analyzed their market position. I also started paying attention to Derek's work stories with new interest. He loved to brag about his importance to the company, how Morrison relied on his expertise, how the other employees looked up to him. But reading between the lines of his self-aggrandizing narratives, I started to get a clearer picture of the actual workplace dynamics. Derek was what you might charitably call results-oriented, and less charitably call a nightmare to work with. He'd mentioned several times that he'd had to restructure his team, which seemed to mean firing people who didn't appreciate his management style. He talked about raising standards and eliminating dead weight, always with this tone that suggested anyone who couldn't keep up with his vision simply wasn't committed enough to excellence. Emma had stopped asking about his work stories. I noticed. She'd just nod and make appropriate supportive noises while Derek held forth about his latest triumph over incompetent colleagues or demanding clients. The more I learned about Derek's workplace personality, the more I realized that his treatment of me wasn't personal. It was just who he was. He was a bully who used his position to make other people feel small. And he'd found in marriage to my daughter the perfect captive audience for his ego. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I called my financial advisor, Michael Chen, who'd been managing my investment portfolio for the past 8 years. Michael was sharp, discreet, and had helped me turn my modest inheritance into something substantially more impressive through careful, long-term investing. I want to explore a business acquisition, I told him during our meeting the following week. Michael raised an eyebrow. That's a departure from your usual investment strategy. What kind of business? A consulting firm called Morrison and Associates. I need you to find out if they're open to offers and what it would take to acquire them. May I ask what's prompted this interest in the consulting industry? I smiled. Let's call it a family investment. Michael was too professional to pry further, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. Over the next few weeks, he put out feelers through his network of business brokers and industry contacts. The initial reports were encouraging. Richard Morrison was indeed interested in retiring, and while he'd received a few informal inquiries over the years, none had progressed to serious negotiations. Most of the interested parties had been larger consulting firms looking to absorb Morrison and Associates into their existing operations, which wasn't what Morrison wanted for his employees. He's looking for someone who will maintain the company culture and keep the existing staff, Michael reported. He's more interested in finding the right buyer than maximizing the sale price. What kind of price range are we talking about? Michael consulted his notes. Based on their revenue and client base, probably somewhere between 8 and 12 million. The lower end, if you can convince him you're committed to preserving what he's built. 8 to 12 million. It was more than I'd originally planned to spend, but well within my means. My investment portfolio had grown to just over 20 million over the years, and I'd always been conservative about withdrawing funds. This would be a significant purchase, but not a reckless one. Set up a meeting, I told Michael. I want to talk to Morrison directly. What should I tell him about your background? He's going to want to know why you're interested in acquiring a consulting firm. I thought about that for a moment. Tell him I'm a retired investor looking for a stable business to purchase and operate. Someone who values employee relationships and long-term growth over quick profits, and the consulting industry experience. I'll figure that out. The truth was, I had no intention of actually running Morrison and Associates myself. I had other plans for what would happen after the acquisition. But first, I needed to buy the company. My meeting with Richard Morrison was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at his office. I'd driven past the Morrison and Associates building several times over the years without really noticing it. It was a modest 2-story office building in a business park about 20 minutes from downtown. the kind of place that housed insurance agencies and accounting firms and small, professional services companies. Richard Morrison turned out to be exactly what I'd expected from my research. Early 70s, gray-haired, wearing a conservative suit that looked expensive but not flashy. He had the kind of firm handshake and direct eye contact that suggested someone who'd spent decades building professional relationships. "Mrs. Henderson, thank you for coming in. Michael Chen speaks very highly of you." We spent the first part of the meeting going through the usual due diligence questions. Morrison wanted to understand my financial capacity, my long-term plans for the company, my thoughts on employee retention. I'd prepared for these questions, and I gave him the answers. I thought he wanted to hear about stability and continuity. "I'm not looking to make dramatic changes," I explained. "I believe in the value of institutional knowledge and existing relationships. My goal would be to provide the resources and support necessary for continued growth while maintaining the culture you've built." Morrison nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. Too many potential buyers see acquisition as an opportunity to slash costs and maximize short-term returns. But this company is more than just a balance sheet. These employees have families, mortgages, kids in college. They deserve better than to be treated as disposable resources. "I completely agree," I said, and I meant it. Whatever my personal motivations for this acquisition, I had no intention of disrupting the lives of innocent employees. "Can you tell me about your management team?" I asked. "Who would be handling day-to-day operations during the transition?" Morrison pulled out an organizational chart and started walking me through the key personnel. Senior consultants, project managers, administrative staff. All the usual corporate hierarchy you'd expect in a small professional services firm. And our regional managers oversee client relationships and team performance in their respective territories. Morrison continued. "Derek Williams, for example, manages our Ohio region. Bright young man, very ambitious. He's been instrumental in some of our recent client acquisitions." I kept my expression neutral. "That's good to hear. Strong regional leadership is important. Derek's actually married to one of our client's service representatives' daughters," Morrison said with a smile. "Small world, though I don't think she works for us directly." I realized Morrison was confusing some details, but I didn't correct him. Let him think what he wanted about Derek's connections and importance to the company. We spent another hour going through financial projections, client contracts, and operational details. Morrison was clearly proud of what he'd built, and rightfully so. Morrison and Associates was a solid, well-run company with loyal employees and satisfied clients. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Henderson," Morrison said as our meeting wound down. "I've had other inquiries, but most of them felt like they were more interested in what they could extract from this company than what they could contribute to it. You're asking the right questions and saying the right things. I believe in treating people with respect," I said. "Employees, clients, everyone. It's just good business." "Exactly. Respect and integrity are the foundation of everything we do here. If someone doesn't understand that, they don't belong in this organization." I thought about Derek and his management philosophy of eliminating dead weight and raising standards. Something told me his definition of respect and integrity might not align with Morrison's. "I'd like to move forward with this," I told Morrison. "What's the next step?" "I'll have my attorney draw up a preliminary agreement. If we can settle on terms, we could potentially close within 60 days. 60 days. 2 months to become Derek's boss. I drove home that afternoon feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I was about to spend a significant portion of my wealth to buy a company I had no experience running. Also, I could teach my son-in-law a lesson about treating people with respect. Put like that, it sounded insane. But then I thought about Emma's face at dinner last week, the way she'd apologized for Derek's behavior, made excuses for his rudeness, diminished herself to avoid conflict. I thought about the confident young woman she used to be and the anxious, apologetic person she was becoming. Maybe it was insane, but sometimes insane is exactly what the situation calls for. Over the next few weeks, Michael and Morrison's attorneys worked out the details of the acquisition. The final price came to $9.2 million, which included the building, equipment, client contracts, and a commitment to retain all existing employees for at least 1 year. Morrison was so pleased with the arrangement that he offered to stay on for 3 months to help with the transition. I accepted gratefully, knowing I'd need all the help I could get to understand how the business actually operated. The closing was scheduled for a Friday morning in late October. I signed more papers than I'd ever seen in my life, transferred more money than I'd ever spent on anything except my house. And suddenly found myself the owner of Morrison & Associates. Richard Morrison shook my hand warmly after the last signature was notarized. I feel good about this, Mrs. Henderson. I think you're going to take excellent care of this company and these people. I certainly intend to, I said. What I didn't mention was that taking care of people sometimes requires holding them accountable for their actions, and I was very much looking forward to holding Derek Williams accountable. Morrison had planned to announce his retirement and the ownership change to the staff the following Monday. He'd already prepared a memo explaining that he was stepping back, but that operations would continue normally under new management. I thought you might want to address the staff personally, Morrison suggested. Let them know your vision for the company. Answer any concerns they might have about the transition. That's a good idea, I agreed. I'd like to meet with the management team first, then address the broader staff. Morrison nodded. I'll set up a management meeting for Monday afternoon. Regional managers, senior consultants, department heads, the core leadership team. Derek would be in that meeting. Derek, who had no idea that his mother-in-law had just become his boss. I spent the weekend preparing for what was going to be either the most satisfying conversation of my life or a complete disaster. Probably both. Monday morning, I got up early and put on my best business suit, navy blue, well-tailored, conservative but expensive. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in a corporate boardroom, not like someone's elderly mother-in-law who didn't understand how the real world worked. I arrived at Morrison & Associates at 10 o'clock. 2 hours before the management meeting, Morrison met me in the lobby and gave me a brief tour of the facilities, introducing me to staff members as the new owner without going into detail about my background. Most of the employees seemed cautiously optimistic about the change. Morrison was well liked, but he'd been less hands-on in recent years, and there was a sense that the company needed fresh energy and investment to grow. Mrs. Henderson will be taking an active role in operations, Morrison explained to the administrative staff. She's very committed to maintaining our culture of mutual respect and professional excellence. I caught a few curious glances but mostly polite smiles and welcomes. These seemed like good people, the kind of employees who showed up, did their work well, and went home to their families. The kind of people Derek probably considered dead weight if they didn't constantly praise his brilliance. At noon, Morrison and I went to lunch to go over the agenda for the afternoon management meeting. He'd prepared profiles of all the key personnel, including their tenure with the company, areas of responsibility, and his assessment of their strengths and development needs. Derek Williams, Morrison said, pulling out a folder. Regional manager for Ohio operations. Hired about 3 years ago, promoted to his current position 8 months ago. How has he performed in the management role? Morrison hesitated slightly. Derek is very results-oriented. He's aggressive about pursuing new clients and isn't afraid to make tough decisions. That was diplomatic corporate speak for he's difficult to work with but he gets things done. Any specific challenges or concerns? Well, Morrison said carefully. Derek's management style can be somewhat intense. He sets high standards for his team, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but there have been some complaints about communication and workplace atmosphere. What kind of complaints? Nothing that's risen to the level of formal HR issues, but there's been some turnover in his department. Exit interviews suggest that people find his approach more demanding than collaborative. In other words, Derek was exactly the kind of manager I'd suspected he was, someone who confused being demanding with being effective, who thought leadership meant making other people afraid of disappointing you. Have you addressed these concerns with him? I've had conversations with Derek about leadership development and team building. He's very confident in his methods and believes that high standards inevitably create some discomfort for underperforming employees. I could practically hear Derek saying those words. High standards. Underperforming employees. The same language he used to justify his treatment of anyone he considered beneath him. What's your overall assessment? Morrison sighed. Derek is talented and ambitious, and he does deliver results. But I worry that his approach isn't sustainable long-term. Good employees don't stay in environments where they feel constantly criticized and undervalued. Perfect. Morrison had just given me the professional justification for everything I was about to do. At 2 o'clock, Morrison led me into the conference room for the management meeting. It was a standard corporate conference room with a long table, rolling chairs, and a whiteboard covered with project timelines and client names. The management team was already assembled, 6 people total, including Derek. I took a seat at the head of the table next to Morrison and waited for everyone to settle in. Derek was sitting about halfway down the table, looking confident and relaxed. He was dressed in his usual expensive suit, checking his phone with the casual arrogance of someone who considered himself indispensable. He hadn't looked up when I entered the room. "Good afternoon, everyone," Morrison began. "As you know, I've been planning my retirement for some time, and I'm pleased to announce that we've completed the ownership transition I mentioned in my memo this morning." Now Derek looked up from his phone. His eyes swept the room, taking in the unfamiliar faces, and then landed on me. I watched his expression change from mild curiosity to confusion, to something approaching panic as he realized who was sitting at the head of the conference table. "I'd like you all to meet Mrs. Margaret Henderson, the new owner of Morrison and Associates." The room fell silent. Everyone was looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to say something inspirational about the future of the company and my vision for continued success. Everyone, except Derek, who was staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. Derek smiled warmly at the group and began the speech. I'd prepared about continuity and growth and valuing the existing team, but I kept my eyes on Derek, watching him try to process what was happening. His mother-in-law, the unemployed woman he'd been patronizing and dismissing for 3 years, had just become his boss. And this was only the beginning. The silence in that conference room stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only about 10 seconds. I could see Derek's mind racing, trying to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate joke or if his world had actually just turned upside down. "Mrs. Henderson brings extensive experience in investment management and business development," Morrison continued, either not noticing Derek's distress or politely ignoring it. "She's committed to maintaining our core values while providing the resources necessary for strategic growth." I cleared my throat and addressed the group, keeping my voice professional and warm. "Thank you, Richard. I'm excited to be working with all of you. I know transitions can be unsettling, but I want to assure you that my primary goal is to support and strengthen what you've already built here." Around the table, heads were nodding politely. The other managers seemed cautiously optimistic, asking reasonable questions about operational changes and reporting structures. Derek said nothing. He just sat there, staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. For the first time since I'd known him, Derek Williams was completely speechless. "I'll be taking some time over the next few weeks to meet individually with each of you," I continued. "I want to understand your roles, your challenges, and your ideas for improvement. This is your company as much as it is mine, and I value your expertise." "That sounds wonderful," said Linda Chen, one of the senior consultants. "We appreciate you taking the time to learn about our operations before making any major changes." "Absolutely. I'm a firm believer that the best decisions come from listening to the people who do the actual work." I glanced at Derek as I said this. "I'm particularly interested in hearing about team dynamics and management approaches that have been working well." Now Derek found his voice. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, and I could hear him struggling to keep his tone professional. "This is unexpected. I had no idea you were involved in business acquisition." "There's a lot you don't know about me, Derek," I replied smoothly. "I'm looking forward to learning more about your work here as well." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, covering operational details and transition timelines. Morrison had prepared a thorough handover plan, and the other managers asked intelligent questions about everything from client communications to budget approvals. Derek participated minimally, offering only brief responses when directly asked about his regional operations. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to figure out what this meant for him personally. After the meeting ended and the other managers had filed out, Derek lingered behind. Morrison was gathering his papers, discussing scheduling details with me for the following week. "Richard," Derek said, "could I have a moment to speak with Mrs. Henderson privately?" Morrison looked at me questioningly. I nodded. "Of course. I'll be in my office if you need anything, Margaret." And then it was just Derek and me in the conference room. He waited until Morrison's footsteps had faded down the hallway before speaking. "What the hell is this?" he said, dropping all pretense of professional courtesy. "I'm sorry, could you be more specific?" I replied, keeping my voice level. "You know exactly what I mean. You bought this company. I did. Is there a problem with that?" Derek stood up and started pacing behind his chair. This is insane. You're doing this to get back at me, aren't you? This is some kind of revenge fantasy. Derek, I think you're being paranoid. I made a business investment that I believe will be profitable. The fact that you work here is simply a coincidence. He stopped pacing and stared at me. Coincidence? You expect me to believe that's a coincidence? Believe whatever you like. But I should remind you that we're now in a professional relationship, and I expect you to conduct yourself accordingly. Professional relationship, Derek repeated, his voice getting louder. You're my wife's mother. This is completely inappropriate. There are conflict of interest issues, family dynamics, all kinds of problems with this situation. Are you saying you're unable to maintain professional behavior when working with family members? I'm saying this is a setup. You're trying to what? Control my career. Embarrass me. Get some kind of twisted satisfaction from being my boss. I sat back in my chair and studied him. This was interesting. In all the scenarios I'd imagined for this moment, I hadn't quite expected Derek to immediately jump to accusations and conspiracy theories. I'd thought he might try to charm his way through it, or at least attempt to maintain some professional dignity. Instead, he was showing me exactly who he really was when he felt threatened, and it wasn't pretty. Derek, I said calmly, I understand. This is surprising, but you're making a lot of assumptions about my motivations. Perhaps we should schedule a proper one-on-one meeting later this week to discuss your role and responsibilities going forward. My role and responsibilities? Are you kidding me? You can't just waltz in here and start giving me orders. I've been with this company for 3 years. I know these clients. I know these systems. Morrison depends on me. Richard is retiring. And as the new owner, I'll be evaluating all positions based on performance and fit with company culture. Something in my tone must have finally gotten through to him, because Derek suddenly went very quiet. What do you mean, evaluating positions? I mean exactly what I said. I'll be conducting performance reviews with all management personnel over the next month. Based on those reviews, I'll be making decisions about organizational structure and personnel assignments. Derek sank back into his chair. You're going to fire me? I haven't made any decisions about anyone's employment, but I will be looking closely at management effectiveness, team dynamics, and alignment with company values. Company values, Derek said bitterly. What company values? This is a consulting firm, not a charity. The only thing that matters is results, and I deliver results. Do you? Because from what I understand, your department has had significant turnover in the past year. Derek's face flushed. Turnover happens. This is a competitive industry. People who can't handle the pace find other opportunities, or people who can't handle poor management find other opportunities. The words hung in the air between us. This was the first time I'd ever directly challenged Derek's behavior, and I could see him struggling with how to respond. Look, he said, finally, I don't know what Emma has been telling you about my work. But Emma hasn't told me anything about your work. Derek, this assessment is based entirely on conversations with Richard Morrison and review of departmental performance metrics. That was mostly true. Emma hadn't complained about Derek's work because she'd stopped talking about anything that might reflect poorly on her husband. But Morrison's comments about Derek's management style had been quite enlightening. I want to be clear about something, I continued. My relationship with Emma has no bearing on my evaluation of your professional performance. I'm perfectly capable of separating family dynamics from business decisions. Are you? Because this whole situation feels pretty personal to me. I leaned forward slightly. Derek, in the 3 years you've known me, have you ever seen me make impulsive decisions? Have I ever struck you as someone who would spend $9 million on a petty grudge? The number clearly caught his attention. $9 million was more money than Derek made in a decade? It was real money, serious money, the kind of money that didn't get spent on family drama. $9 million, he said quietly. Plus transition costs and operational improvements. This is a substantial investment in a business I intend to run profitably for many years. I could see him recalculating the situation. If I'd really spent that kind of money to buy Morrison and Associates, then maybe this wasn't just about him. Maybe I was actually serious about running a business, which made his position significantly more precarious than he'd initially realized. So what happens now? He asked. Now we see if you can be the kind of employee this company needs. I'll be scheduling individual meetings with all the managers over the next 2 weeks. Yours will be Friday afternoon. Derek nodded slowly. And If you decide I'm not the kind of employee this company needs, then we'll discuss other arrangements." He stood up to leave, then turned back. "Does Emma know about this?" "Not yet. I plan to tell her tonight." "What are you going to say?" "The truth. That I've made a business investment and I'm looking forward to working with talented professionals who share my values." Derek stared at me for a long moment, clearly trying to figure out if there was some hidden meaning in my words. "I'll see you Friday," he said finally, and walked out. After he left, I sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes, processing what had just happened. Derek's reaction had been even more revealing than I'd expected. When faced with a challenge to his authority, he'd immediately become defensive, accusatory, and unprofessional. If that's how he reacted to his new boss asking reasonable questions about his performance, I could only imagine how he treated subordinates who dared to question his decisions. I spent the rest of the afternoon in meetings with Morrison, going over operational details and getting access to personnel files and performance reviews. The picture that emerged of Derek's management style was consistent with what I'd observed in his personal life. Derek had been promoted to regional manager 8 months ago, and since then, his department had lost 3 experienced consultants and 2 administrative staff members. Exit interviews cited communication issues and incompatible management philosophy as primary reasons for leaving. The consultants who remained in Derek's department were either very new hires or long-term employees who kept their heads down and avoided conflict. None of them had received promotions or significant raises under Derek's management, despite taking on additional responsibilities to cover for departed colleagues. Derek's own performance reviews painted him as someone who was resolute and decisive but who could benefit from development in collaborative leadership approaches. His clients' satisfaction scores were average, not exceptional, and his team's productivity metrics had declined since his promotion. On paper, Derek was exactly the kind of manager who looked good in quarterly reports but was slowly destroying team morale and long-term capability. I've been meaning to have a more serious conversation with Derek about his leadership development, Morrison admitted as we reviewed the files, but with my retirement planning, I kept putting it off. I was hoping he'd mature into the role with more experience. "Some people grow into leadership responsibilities," I said. "Others just get better at hiding their limitations." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Margaret, I think Derek might actually benefit from working with you. You have a directness about you that could help him understand the difference between being demanding and being effective." If Morrison only knew how direct I was planning to be. That evening, I drove home trying to figure out how to explain the day's events to Emma. I'd been planning this conversation for weeks, but now that the moment was here, I wasn't sure where to start. Emma had always been protective of Derek, and she'd probably see my acquisition of his company as some kind of attack on her marriage. I needed to present this in a way that emphasized the business aspects while downplaying the personal motivations. Even though the personal motivations were pretty much the entire point, I called Emma around 7 o'clock and asked if I could come over to talk to her about something important. She sounded worried on the phone, probably imagining health scares or family emergencies. "Is everything okay, Mom? You sound different." "Everything's fine, sweetheart. I just have some news I'd like to share with you in person." When I arrived at Emma and Derek's house, Derek's car wasn't in the driveway. Emma explained that he was working late on a project presentation, which was probably true. He was likely trying to figure out how to salvage his career situation. "What's going on, Mom?" Emma asked as she made tea in the kitchen. "You sounded so mysterious on the phone." "I wanted to let you know that I've made a significant business investment," I began. "I've purchased a consulting company called Morrison and Associates." Emma paused in the middle of pouring water into the teapot. "You bought a company? What kind of company?" "Business consulting. It's a solid firm with good clients and experienced staff. The owner was looking to retire, and it seemed like a good opportunity." Wow, that's a big step, Mom. I had no idea you were interested in running a business. I've been thinking about it for a while. I have the financial resources, and I wanted to do something more active with my investments." Emma brought the tea over to the kitchen table and sat down across from me. "That's exciting. I'm proud of you for taking on something new." I could see her processing the information, trying to understand what this meant for our family dynamics. Emma had always worried about me being lonely or bored since her father died, so the idea of me having a new professional challenge probably seemed positive to her. "There's one other thing," I said carefully. It turns out that Derek works for Morrison and Associates. So he'll be one of my employees. Emma's teacup stopped halfway to her mouth. Derek works for your company. Apparently so. It was quite a surprise to both of us. Oh my God, Mom. Derek's company. You bought Derek's company. I bought a company that happens to employ Derek. There's a difference. Emma set down her teacup and stared at me. Please tell me this is some kind of coincidence. It's a business investment, Emma. Nothing more. But Emma wasn't stupid, and she'd been watching the tension between Derek and me for years. She knew there was more to this story than coincidental business opportunities. Mom, this is going to create so many problems. Derek's going to think you did this to spite him. He's going to be impossible to live with. Derek's reaction to the situation is his choice. I've made it clear that I expect him to maintain professional behavior, just like any other employee. Any other employee? Mom, he's your son-in-law. You can't just pretend there's no family relationship. I can separate family relationships from business relationships. The question is whether Derek can do the same. Emma was quiet for a long moment, thinking through the implications. What does this mean for his job? Are you going to fire him? I'm going to evaluate all employees based on their performance and fit with company culture. Derek will be treated the same as everyone else. That's not an answer, Mom. It's the only answer I can give you right now. I haven't completed my performance evaluations yet. Emma stood up and started pacing around the kitchen. This is a disaster. Derek's going to think you're trying to control our lives. He's going to say you're manipulating the situation to get back at him for something. Is that what you think I'm doing? Emma stopped pacing and looked at me. I don't know what to think. This seems like a pretty extreme coincidence. I could see the conflict in her eyes. Part of her probably suspected that Derek hadn't been treating me well. But she'd invested so much in defending their marriage that acknowledging the problem would require admitting she'd been making excuses for unacceptable behavior. Emma, can I ask you something? Are you happy? What does that have to do with anything? Just answer the question. Are you happy in your marriage? Yes, she said quickly. Too quickly. Of course I'm happy. Why would you ask that? Because I've watched you change over the past 3 years. You used to be confident and outspoken. You had opinions and dreams and plans. Now you spend most of your time making excuses for Derek's behavior and apologizing for things that aren't your fault. Emma's face flushed. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you talked about your graphic design business? When was the last time you made a decision without checking Derek's reaction first? Marriage is about compromise, Mom. It's about considering your partner's feelings and needs. Compromise involves both people giving up something. What has Derek compromised on? Emma didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. Look, I said gently, I'm not trying to interfere in your marriage. But I am going to run my business according to my values. I believe in treating people with respect, and I expect the same from my employees. Are you saying Derek doesn't treat people with respect? I'm saying I'll be evaluating everyone's professional behavior, including their management style and team leadership. Emma sank back into her chair. He's going to hate this. He's going to think you planned the whole thing to humiliate him, maybe. But that says more about Derek's mindset than it does about my intentions. We talked for another hour, with Emma growing increasingly anxious about the potential fallout. I tried to reassure her that I would handle the situation professionally, but I could see that she was already imagining worst-case scenarios. When Derek came home around 10 o'clock, I was still there. He walked into the kitchen, saw me sitting at his table drinking tea with his wife, and his expression immediately darkened. Well, he said, I assume Emma knows about your little business acquisition now. We've been discussing it, I said calmly. And, what did you tell her? That it was all just a big coincidence. Emma looked back and forth between us, clearly picking up on the tension. Derek, maybe we should all sit down and talk about this like adults. Adults. Derek laughed bitterly. Your mother just bought my company out of spite, and you want to have an adult conversation about it? I bought a profitable business, I corrected. The fact that you worked there is irrelevant to the investment decision. Irrelevant. Are you seriously going to stick with that story? It's not a story, Derek. It's the truth. Derek turned to Emma. You can't possibly believe this is just a coincidence. Your mother has been looking for ways to undermine me since the day we met. That's not true, Emma said quietly. Isn't it? She's never liked me, never approved of our marriage. never missed an opportunity to make me feel like I'm not good enough for her precious daughter. I felt my temper starting to rise, but I kept my voice level. Derek, I've never said anything negative about your marriage or your relationship with Emma. You didn't have to say anything. Your attitude has been clear from day one. My attitude has been responding to your behavior. If you felt disapproval from me, perhaps you should consider why. There it is, Derek said triumphantly, finally admitting what this is really about. Emma was looking increasingly distressed. Please, both of you, just stop. This isn't helping anything. You're right, I said, standing up. This conversation isn't productive. Derek, I'll see you Friday afternoon for your performance review. I suggest you spend the time between now and then thinking about how you want to approach our professional relationship going forward. I kissed Emma goodbye and left, hearing raised voices from the kitchen as I walked to my car. The rest of the week was spent in meetings with the other managers and department heads. Linda Chen, the senior consultant, was impressive, smart, experienced, well respected by her team. Marcus Rodriguez, who managed the administrative staff, had innovative ideas about workflow improvements and client communication systems. Each of the other managers was professional, thoughtful, and genuinely committed to the company's success. They asked good questions about my plans for growth and expressed appreciation for my interest in their input. By Thursday evening, I had a clear picture of Morrison & Associates operations and personnel. It was exactly what Morrison had described, a solid company with good people who were being held back by limited investment and, in some cases, poor management. Derek's department was the obvious weak link. Not because of the work they produced, but because of the environment Derek had created. His team members were competent but demoralized, doing good work despite their manager rather than because of him. Friday afternoon arrived, and Derek knocked on my office door at exactly 3:00. He was dressed impeccably, carrying a leather portfolio, and wearing the kind of determined expression that suggested he'd spent considerable time preparing for this meeting. Good afternoon, Derek. Please, have a seat. He sat across from my desk, and opened his portfolio, revealing what looked like charts and performance metrics. I've prepared a comprehensive overview of my department's productivity and client satisfaction scores, he began, launching into what was clearly a rehearsed presentation about his accomplishments and value to the company. I let him talk for about 10 minutes, watching him present his case with the kind of polished confidence that probably worked well with clients. He was good at this part of his job: the external presentation, the professional pitch, the impression management. When he finished, I made a note on my pad and looked up at him. Thank you, Derek. Those are impressive numbers. Now I'd like to talk about your management approach. His confidence faltered slightly. My management approach? Yes. How do you motivate your team? What's your philosophy on leadership and professional development? Derek straightened in his chair. I believe in setting high standards and holding people accountable. This is a competitive industry, and success requires discipline and commitment. Can you give me some specific examples of how you've implemented that philosophy? Well, I've restructured team assignments to maximize efficiency. I've instituted regular performance monitoring to ensure everyone is meeting their targets. I've made it clear that subpar work isn't acceptable. And how has your team responded to these changes? Initially, there was some resistance. Change is always difficult, but the people who are committed to excellence have adapted and improved their performance. What about the people who left your department? 3 consultants and 2 administrative staff in the past 8 months. Derek's jaw tightened slightly. Those were individuals who weren't aligned with the department's goals. It's better for everyone when people find positions that are a better fit for their capabilities. Did you conduct exit interviews with any of them? HR handled the exit interviews. I focused on moving forward with the team members who were committed to success. I consulted the notes I'd taken from those exit interviews. Words like hostile, micromanaging, and impossible to please appeared frequently. Derek, I've had the opportunity to review those exit interviews. The feedback suggests some concerns about communication style and management approach. How do you respond to that? People don't always appreciate direct feedback. I believe in honest communication about performance expectations. There's a difference between direct feedback and creating a hostile work environment. Derek's professional mask slipped for a moment. I've never created a hostile work environment. I've created a results-oriented environment where people are expected to perform at their best. According to the exit interviews, several former employees felt that their best was never good enough. regardless of their actual performance. Maybe their best wasn't good enough. This isn't a participation trophy industry. There it was. The same dismissive attitude he showed toward anyone he perceived as beneath his standards. The same arrogance that had been slowly crushing Emma's confidence for 3 years. Derek, let me ask you something. Do you think effective leadership requires people to fear disappointing you? I think effective leadership requires accountability. That's not what I asked. Do you think fear is an effective motivational tool? Derek was quiet for a moment. I think people perform better when they understand that mediocrity has consequences. And do you think respect and fear are the same thing? I think respect has to be earned. You're absolutely right. Respect does have to be earned. And based on my conversations with your current team members, you haven't earned theirs. Derek's face flushed. That's not true. My team respects my expertise and leadership. Your team is afraid of you, Derek. There's a difference. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder containing feedback forms I'd distributed to all department staff earlier in the week. Anonymous comments about management effectiveness and workplace satisfaction. I asked everyone in the company to provide feedback about their work environment and management support. Would you like to know what your team said about you? Derek stared at the folder like it contained a bomb. One person wrote that they wake up every morning with anxiety about coming to work. Another said they've stopped suggesting new ideas because you shoot down everything that isn't your own concept. A third said they feel like they're walking on eggshells, never knowing what's going to set you off. Those are anonymous comments. They could be coming from anyone. They're coming from people you're supposed to be leading and supporting. People whose job satisfaction and professional development are your responsibility. Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was defensive. I'm not here to be anyone's friend. I'm here to get results. And what results have you gotten, Derek? Your department has the highest turnover in the company, the lowest satisfaction scores, and declining productivity. What exactly are you getting results on? Client satisfaction scores are strong. Revenue targets are being met. Despite your management approach, not because of it. Your team is succeeding in spite of you, not because of you. That hit home. I could see Derek struggling with the implication that his contributions might not be as valuable as he'd believed. So what are you saying? That I'm a bad manager? I'm saying you're a manager who creates fear instead of respect, who tears people down instead of building them up, and who mistakes intimidation for leadership. Derek sat back in his chair, his professional presentation completely forgotten. You're really going to fire me? I'm going to give you a choice, Derek. You can resign with a positive reference and 2 months severance pay. Or you can stay and we can work together to completely rebuild your management approach. What does rebuild my management approach mean? It means you acknowledge that your current methods aren't working. It means you commit to learning collaborative leadership skills. It means you start treating your team members with respect and dignity. And if I refuse, then I'll continue to evaluate your performance based on objective metrics, including team satisfaction and retention. And based on those metrics, your employment may be terminated for cause. Derek was quiet for several minutes, processing his options. I could see him calculating the professional and financial implications of each choice. This is about more than my management style, isn't it? He said finally. This is about how I've treated you and Emma. This is about how you treat people, period. Your team members, your colleagues, your family. The way you interact with me is just one example of a broader pattern. What pattern? You're a bully, Derek. You use your position and perceived authority to make other people feel small. You think leadership means making people afraid to disappoint you. You confuse being demanding with being effective. Derek's face was red now, but he didn't deny it. And you think buying my company is going to change that? I think having consequences for your actions might change that. For the first time in your adult life, someone is holding you accountable for how you treat people. So this is revenge. No, Derek, this is education. I leaned forward in my chair. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go home tonight and think carefully about your options. If you decide to stay, you're going to report to work Monday morning with a completely different attitude. You're going to treat your team members with respect. You're going to listen to their ideas. You're going to support their professional development instead of tearing them down. And if I don't, then you'll find yourself looking for a new job, without a reference from your current employer. And given your management track record here, that might be challenging. Derek closed his portfolio and stood up. You know what's funny? You talk about respect and dignity, but you're doing exactly what you're accusing me of. You're using your position to intimidate me and make me feel small. There's one important difference, Derek. I'm holding you accountable for behavior that hurts other people. You've been hurting people because it makes you feel powerful. He stared at me for a long moment. Emma's going to hate you for this. Maybe, but Emma has been making excuses for your behavior for years. It's time someone stopped enabling you. Derek walked to the door, then turned back. What if I choose to resign? Then I'll wish you well in your future endeavors and hope you've learned something from this experience. And if I stay, then Monday morning, you start over. New management style, new attitude, new respect for the people you're supposed to be leading. After Derek left, I sat in my office feeling a mixture of satisfaction and nervousness. I'd essentially given him an ultimatum: change completely or leave. Either option would be better for his team and for Emma, but I wasn't sure which choice he'd make. Derek had two main character flaws that were driving his behavior: arrogance and cowardice. He was arrogant enough to believe he was justified in treating people poorly, but cowardly enough to avoid direct confrontation when faced with real consequences. The question was, which trait would win out? I got my answer Monday morning. Derek arrived at work at his usual time, dressed in his usual expensive suit, carrying his usual leather briefcase. But something was different about his demeanor. He knocked on my office door at 9 o'clock sharp. "Mrs. Henderson, could I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course, Derek. Come in." He sat down across from my desk, but this time he didn't open a portfolio or launch into a presentation. He just sat quietly for a moment, looking uncomfortable. "I've been thinking about our conversation Friday," he said finally, "and I want to stay." "That's good to hear. What's changed?" "I talked to Emma over the weekend. About a lot of things. About how I've been treating people. About the kind of husband and manager I've become." I waited for him to continue. "She told me some things I didn't want to hear. About how she's been feeling, about changes she's seen in herself since we got married. About sacrifices she's made that I never even noticed." This was more self-awareness than I'd ever seen from Derek. That must have been a difficult conversation. It was. But it was necessary. Derek looked directly at me for the first time since sitting down. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Henderson, for how I've treated you, for the things I've said and implied about your life and your choices. I appreciate that, Derek. I also owe my team an apology, and I want to earn back their respect, not their fear." "What does that look like to you?" "I don't know yet. I was hoping you could help me figure that out." For the first time since I'd known Derek, he was asking for help instead of pretending he had all the answers. It was a start. "I'd be happy to work with you on leadership development. But it's going to require genuine change, not just surface adjustments. I understand. And I want to make those changes, not just because my job depends on it, but because I want to be the kind of person Emma deserves to be married to." Over the following weeks, Derek and I worked together on rebuilding his management approach. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks, but gradually his team began to respond positively to his efforts. Derek started having regular one-on-one meetings with his team members, asking for their input instead of just giving orders. He instituted a team suggestion program and actually implemented several ideas that came from junior staff. Most importantly, he started treating people like human beings instead of performance metrics. The change wasn't immediate or complete, but it was genuine. Derek's team satisfaction scores improved dramatically over the next quarter. And for the first time in months, people stopped dreading their Monday morning meetings. Emma noticed the changes too. Derek stopped coming home stressed and angry about incompetent employees. He started asking about her day instead of just complaining about his own. He even encouraged her to restart her graphic design business, offering to help with marketing and client development. 3 months after the acquisition, Morrison & Associates was operating more smoothly than it had in years. Team morale was up, client satisfaction was strong, and we'd even landed 2 major new contracts. Derek had become, if not an ideal manager, at least a functional one. More importantly, he'd learned to see other people as individuals, deserving of respect rather than obstacles to his own success. During one of our monthly check-ins, Derek brought up the elephant in the room. "You know," he said, "I still can't quite believe you bought this entire company just to teach me a lesson." "I bought this company because it was a good investment," I replied. "The lesson was just a bonus." "Was it worth it? $9 million is a lot to spend on family therapy?" I thought about Emma, who was happier and more confident than she'd been in years. I thought about Derek's team members, who no longer dreaded coming to work. I thought about the dozen employees whose jobs were more secure because the company now had stable ownership and investment capital. Derek, I've made a lot of investments over the years. Some have been more profitable than others. But this is the first one that's improved lives instead of just generating returns. So you're saying it was worth it? I'm saying it was necessary. Sometimes you have to invest in people before they're ready to invest in themselves. Derek was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said finally. For not giving up on me. For believing I could change. I didn't do this for you, Derek. I did this for Emma, and for your team, and for everyone who has to interact with you on a daily basis. But you could have just fired me. I could have. But firing you wouldn't have solved the underlying problem. You would have just gone somewhere else and created the same issues for different people. So this was about accountability. This was about consequences. You spent years treating people poorly without facing any real repercussions. Someone needed to show you that actions have consequences, even for people in positions of authority. Derek nodded. I get that now. And I'm grateful, even if it took me a while to see it that way. 6 months later, Derek was promoted to senior regional manager, overseeing client development across 3 states. His team had the highest retention rate in the company and consistently exceeded performance targets. Emma restarted her graphic design business and within a year had more clients than she could handle. She was confident again, opinionated again. The person she'd been before Derek had slowly convinced her to make herself smaller. As for me, I discovered that I actually enjoyed running a business. Morrison & Associates became more profitable under my ownership. And I found genuine satisfaction in creating an environment where people could do their best work. Sometimes people ask me if I regret spending so much money to teach my son a lesson. But here's the thing, I didn't just buy Derek's company to change Derek. I bought it to change a system that was allowing someone like Derek to harm other people without consequences. Derek wasn't unique. There are Dereks in workplaces everywhere. People who mistake authority for leadership and fear for respect. Most of them never face real accountability for their behavior. Because it's easier to tolerate one difficult manager than to address the systemic problems that create and enable them. But sometimes, if you have the resources and the determination, you can change the system instead of just working around it. Was it worth $9 million to transform a workplace, save a marriage, and teach a bully that actions have consequences? Every time I see Derek treating someone with genuine respect, every time I see Emma pursuing her dreams without apologizing for them, every time I see his former team members thriving in an environment of support instead of fear, I know the answer. It was worth every penny.